That already made a lot of noise. I hope the people online can see us. Welcome everybody to ESCP. Welcome to our fantastic speakers that we have. We're very happy to welcome you to this 4th edition of the cooperation with the Academy of the Sciences. This actually reminds me of my time at the University of Oxford, where I've been doing my PhD. So if you have a university like that, you have a lot of interdisciplinary kinds of events. And I think what I also liked there, I was doing my PhD at a department that actually was at the intersection of, for instance, evidence-based healthcare, sustainable urban development, and also literary studies and history. So I think this is fantastic that you find this at a business school, which is a bit of an oddity for sure. I don't think many other business schools have these kinds of interdisciplinary dialogues and this interest as well to engage with the sciences. We already had a bit of pre-discussion in a way with Antoine to sort of think about the necessity to engage with the sciences, especially as future decision makers. We see a lot of division in society. We see a lot of skepticism of science, rejection of science. And that can only be improved, I think, if we really engage and if we understand the topics at a deep level. I will also give you a bit of context in terms of why this matters. Our 4th edition focused on sustainability. Should probably introduce myself. So I'm Georgi Kirlev. I just recently took up the role of Associate Dean of Sustainability of ESCP Business School. This already tells you a lot, I guess, that we really cherish this subject. It's been established in 2018 already as part of the executive committee, so it's not only a symbolic role, but one that really, also is implied in the strategic decisions that the school is taking. We had one of the first courses that was on sustainability, Olivier Delbar, a good colleague of mine in the sustainability department, back in 1992. When not many people were actually thinking about the environment and what that has to do with business. Certainly, having studied business myself, I never crossed any path with anything that had to do with sustainability, and I think that changed. We also have a dedicated sustainability department, which has more than 20 professors now. We're currently recruiting new ones, and we're really dedicated to this also in our teaching. For instance, there is a fundamental course in the Master in Management, which is our big flagship program, where we're dealing with planetary boundaries, so also going beyond the question of carbon and carbon reduction, actually dealing with biogeochemical flows and what that has to do with sustainability, which is Jérôme's subject area. And we also cherish a perspective that focuses on critical thinking, right? I think that's where Frédérique comes in, also as a historian, as a literary scholar, talking about critical zones. We're going to learn more about what that actually means and in how far we can engage meaningfully in a discourse that helps us advance on these subjects, understand the science, but then also make science-based decisions in order to improve sustainability actions. So I'll stop talking now because we actually want to hear from our fantastic speakers. I'd also like to thank the International Politics Society of ESCP. We'll have one of the students who is going to make the introduction of our speakers, and then we'll have inputs and a discussion relating to the critical zones. So thanks a lot for being here, and I hope you have an enjoyable and as well as revealing, insightful evening with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. We are delighted to welcome 2 renowned scientists to our conference this evening, Mr. Jérôme Gaillardet and Mrs. Frédérique Ait Touati, who will share their invaluable insights on the topic, the Earth's critical zone at the time of the Anthropocene. Jérôme Gaillardet is a distinguished geochemist and professor at the Institut de Physique du Globe de Paris, where he has been teaching since 2001. With a doctorate in geology from University Paris, his groundbreaking research focuses on the biochemical cycles of Earth's chemical elements and their dynamics in the Anthropocene. As the national coordinator of the French network of critical zone observatories and co-coordinator of the OZCAR research network since 2016, he has played a pivotal role in advancing our understanding of Earth's critical zone. In recognition of his contributions to geochemistry, he was awarded the CNRS Silver Medal in 2018. He will be speaking alongside Frédérique Ait Touati, a distinguished historian of science, theatre director, and CNRS Research Fellow at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. Her interdisciplinary work bridges science, literature, and politics with a focus on narratives and aesthetics of the Anthropocene. Since 2014, she has served as Director of Research and Co-Director of the National Transform Program at CNRS and as Director Scientific of SPEAP. Frédérique collaborates with her theatre company, Zone Critique, to develop experimental performances that illuminate Anthropocene themes and have been showcased at prestigious venues such as the Nanterre Amandier Theatre. I would now like to welcome on stage Jérôme Gaillardet, who will begin his presentation. This will be followed by Frédérique, after which we'll proceed with an engaging Q&A session. Thank you.
So thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. I guess I'm using this to move the slides. Okay, so the title of my talk, as you see, is The Critical Zone as a Frontier Object, and I think it was interesting to mention the fact that it's a frontier object in the way that Frédérique we are coming from very different things met around this important concept. And I'm going to talk about the scientific, natural science aspect of what the critical zone is. So the critical zone is something that you already know, actually, because we are living in a critical zone. So the critical zone is an ensemble, so to say, of compartments that are known, have their own study fields, and are completely, most of the time, disconnected. And the critical zone is a scientific initiative in which is aiming at connecting all these different disciplines and compartments, and to look at the system, at the critical zone as a system. So it's really an holistic approach, at least an attempt to get an holistic approach, a systemic approach on the livable part of the planet. So on that diagram, which is not a good diagram, I agree with Frédérique on that point, but this is the best I can do. I'm trying to represent the different compartments that we are all familiar with, which are composing the critical zone. So I'm not going into the details here, but in particular, there is one compartment which is difficult to define, which is the soil. What is the soil? In French, for example, the soil means a surface, but in English and in other different languages, the soil is something which has a 3D dimension and goes deep into the beneath our feet. And for geologists, the soil is not only the very thin pellicule in which we plant seeds and that we use for growth and agriculture, but it extends from the very surface to the deepest part of the earth, where there is no clay and organic matter left but rocks. So if we want a very short definition of the critical zone, it's everything which is lying between the sky and the rocks. Okay, so this is really one of the critical interfaces of the Earth system. And so the critical zone, just a little bit of history, was proposed by the National Research Council in the US in 2001 in order to foster different disciplines to work together. It has not only a vertical dimension, the critical zone also has a lateral dimensions. By lateral, I mean the fact that when you live, for example, here in the delta of the Rhône Valley, for example, in France, you depends upon what is happening here in the top of the Alps mountain. So everything is connected, and there's no way you can make a politics, for example, of a given place without ignoring the connections of that place with other ecosystems and other places. And so basically, the critical zone is something which is very specific to the planet Earth in the solar system. The Earth is a rocky planet, meaning that it's basically made of rocks. It's very comparable to our sister planets, which are Venus, Mars, the Moon. But as you know, and this is represented on that slide, the surface of the Earth is completely rejuvenate all the time. And if you compare the moon and the Earth, which is on the two diagrams, the two planets here represented here, the moon has the traces of the imprint of the different meteorites and asteroids that the planet met during its long geological history, but the Earth has not. The Earth has completely paced the impact craters that she should have on its surface. So it means that the planet Earth has something which is specific, which is the fact that the surface of the Earth is completely all the time rejuvenated, like your skin. When you cut your skin, 20 days after, your skin is completely repaired and you have a new skin. And this is exactly what is happening on the planet Earth. And so the critical zone can be seen as a conflict between two very big sources of energy. And these two sources of energy are really critical. They're very important to take into account. The first source of energy is the solar energy. We are receiving from the sun a very large amount of energy, which is activating the evaporation of the ocean, which is activating the atmospheric circulation. But we are also dependent upon the energy from the deep Earth. In terms of order of magnitude, the energy that we receive from below has nothing to see with the amount of energy that we are receiving from the sun, but on the long time scale, typically a geological time scale, the energy from the deep Earth is really important because this is what is responsible for the mountain building, volcanic activities exactly. There would be no life on the planet if the planet wouldn't have been a plate tectonic, which is exactly the mechanism by which the planet is cooling. And so at the interface between the solar energy and the deep energy, there is a transformation zone, which is the only livable, habitable part of the planet, and which I'm calling today the critical zone. And if we look into the details, the critical zone is developed by the transformation of the rocks which are beneath. So what is a peculiarity of the planet is that the surface of the planet is always continuously transformed by the water cycle, which is also specific of our planet, and by the action between the atmosphere and the rock. So it's really a reactive zone, a very thin layer at the very top of the terrestrial crust in which life has been able to develop and which is our habitat. Okay, and this is some pictures of critical zone, if you wish, in different places of the world. And if you go to tropical conditions, and this is the case here on this lower slide taken in a quarry in Guadeloupe, you can see that the critical zone, which is this transformed part of the rocky planet Earth, is very deep. But if you go to colder climates, for example, here, we are in the northern part of Europe here, then the critical zone is very thin because this transformation are depending upon biological activity, which is much higher, productivity is much higher in the tropics, and it also depends on the amount of rain which is falling on the ground, and the amount of rain is, of course, much more important in the tropics than in the northern latitude. So this critical zone is not a static system, okay? It's a dynamic system. It's a system which is continuously formed by transformation affecting the rocks and continuously deformed or deconstructed. And I'm not going to go into the details here, but it's like it has to be seen as a conveyor belt, okay? So the critical zone is created here at the base because plate tectonic, which is creating the mountains and the volcanic activity, is providing material, new material all the time. It's entering into a kind of conveyor belt where it's transformed. At the end, it is exported to rivers and to the ocean. So there is a very tight balance between forces which are producing this thin pellicule at the surface of the Earth and forces which are destroying it, okay? And the long-term equilibrium of that critical zone, which again is our habitable zone on the planet, depends upon the balance between the two phenomena, production, destruction, okay? And so this is an image of a river carrying a lot of particles from the soil, which is showing how the critical zone is being destroyed on the long term. This is completely unnatural process. Okay, so the critical zone is important in earth sciences, and it's becoming more and more important in earth sciences because this is a critical interface of the planet. Okay, there are many critical, so to say, interfaces on the planet Earth, but this one is really one which is important. I have listed here on that slide a couple of consequences of the way the critical zone is functioning. So remember that the only source of nutrients to ecosystems is the transformation of rocks into something else. There is no phosphorus. We need phosphorus for our health and growth. And the phosphorus, where does the phosphorus come from? It comes from the rocks, and it comes from the transformation of the rocks by the water cycle. So ultimately, the critical zone is exactly what is sustaining the life ecosystems on Earth. But it's also important, the critical zone is also important for water quality. If you want to understand the water quality at the surface of the Earth, you need to have a good knowledge of how the critical zone is functioning. It is important for climate regulation. I don't have the time to enter into the details here, but the transformation I've been describing, the transformation of rocks into this soft pellicule at the surface of the Earth, which is livable, consumes CO2 from the atmosphere. Okay? In other words, the rocks are respiring. And when a rock is exposed to atmospheric CO2 and water, it's pumping CO2 from the atmosphere, meaning that on the long term, the formation of the critical zone is not only creating the thin pellicule on which we live, but it's also purifying the atmosphere from the CO2. Okay, and so what is difficult with the study of the critical zone, and this is really a scientific challenge, is that it's mixing timescales of very different orders of magnitude. For example, if you are a tree, you see in your life, in your time life, you can see the tree growing up and dying, okay? Something you are familiar with. But you don't see the rock being weathered by atmospheric CO2 and the water cycle. It's something which is too slow for Earth, humans, to sense it, okay? So we need to be equipped by instruments if we want to calculate how rapid this reaction is, okay? So this is a difficulty in terms of scientific approach and mathematical modeling, because you have to build models which are incorporating very small timescales, like the second, and very long timescale, million year, okay? And so it's posing a number of very big numerical problems in particular. I'm passing on that. So basically, the Critical Zone Initiative was invented, so to say, so that our communities could have their Higgs boson, you know, the way you can go and see your funders and say, okay, I have one big question I have to solve, and this is my question, so give me money, enough of money so that I can solve this problem. And the Higgs boson of the critical zone science is written in red on that slide. Are we able to understand and model the behavior and the trajectory of the critical zone, the human habitat at the surface of the planet, the Earth's skin, if you prefer, in response to the changes of the Anthropocene? We are living in a very unique period of the Earth history where everything is changing very fast and at a very rapid rate. And we don't know exactly how our territories, how this very thin pellicule we are living in is going to react. So what do we know about the feedbacks? What do we know about the regulatory loops that characterize the compartments that compose it? Okay, this is the Higgs question, and you can believe me, we don't have that much knowledge on those questions. And if you look, for example, at that slide, you have the geological map of the northern part of France, and you have the ecosystem or Google map of the northern part of France, and you do see the analogies between the geology and the type of vegetation or land use, meaning that humans rely on the geological composition of the critical zone. Because remember, there are two ingredients, one from below, one from above. And so the critical zone is also critical, and this is where Frédérique and I, we met, because it's critical for humans, because this is the only part of the planet that we are living on, okay? We're not living on the globe. We're living on a very, very thin pellicule, a veneer at the surface of the globe. And of course, human activities are such that we are completely destabilizing the natural, I don't use a lot this word natural, but the Earth system equilibria, okay? The Earth system has been stable, more or less, over the last billion years. And now a species is coming, which is completely changing the cycles, which have been stabilizing the Earth for so much time. Just one figure, it was published, this paper was published in 2018, and it's really impressive. On that diagram, you have the time on the y-axis here. And you have the mass of material in human infrastructures. And you also have the mass of the biomass, which is a mass of living organism at the surface. In 2001, we reached the point where the biomass equals the amount of human infrastructures. So if you find arguments to convince your friends that we are in a new period of the Earth history, this is the slide to show, okay? In 2021, the mass of infrastructured things by humans has been the same than the biomass, the mass of all the living organisms of the planet, okay? And so we are facing a challenge, which is that by 2050, we will have 9 billion people on the planet. We will need 80% more energy. We will need 60% more food and 55% more water. How are we going to achieve these goals? Okay, this is really the big question. Okay, and so far it seems to be very complicated. And so what the scientists have done, and this is how the scientists of my community get organized, we have chosen places which are instrumented and where the different disciplines are going to meet. Because I didn't insist too much on that, but one of the problems of the critical zone is that it is studied by very different scientific fields. For example, maybe it can, for your communities, it's something that could be really trivial, but for us it's not. The critical zone can be studied by, climatologists, but it also can be studied by geologists, hydrologists, meteorologists, what else, ecologists, etc. And these people don't speak the same language. Believe me, they don't understand each other because the scientific, knowledge has been extremely specialized, has been developing by silos, and it's really difficult now to get a synthetic, systemic view of the critical zone because the different scientific disciplines are not talking to each other, or they have a hard time talking to each other. So critical zone observatories are places where the different disciplines are going to meet. Okay, so the nice thing about critical zone observatories is that it's really situated. Okay, it's not something global. It's a place where you're going to go, that you're going to instrument for the long term, because if you want to sense the very slow processes, you need long-term instrumentation. There's no way you can make a measurement, come back to your lab and publish your paper. No way. You need very long time series in order to see how the short time scales are operating. And so we are, in a way, composing the world with critical zone observatories. We are not going to put critical zone observatories everywhere, but we are trying to find representative places where some of the processes that we want to study will be illuminated, so to say. And the aim is to compose the world by these kind of observatories. And just one example, in Brittany, we have a critical zone observatory which is dealing with a very big problem that in Brittany, you can see, there is 10 million pigs, 40 million chicken for 3 million of humans. And the big issue of that, okay, Brittany is a very prosperous region in terms of agribusiness, but the price to pay is really big because all the waters from Brittany are contaminated by nitrate. Because of course, the Brittany agriculture is very productive, but it's just because we put a lot of nitrate and phosphate into the fields. And so in that observatory, we're trying to understand what is the fate of nitrate. Okay, and actually we discover that there is a lot of processes which are affecting the nitrate once it's in the groundwater, once it's in the critical zone, processes that were unknown, completely unknown 20 years ago. And it depends upon a lot of parameters such as the geology, the local slope, the relief, the amount of water which is coming from the atmosphere, for example. And I'm not going to enter into the details here, but you have a representation of a catchment, a drainage catchment, in which we try to reconstruct in pink the flow path of water into the system. This is a first order question. When it rains, where does the water pass, goes? And what is the route of the water into the system? This is a first order question, which is still not solved. And so we have, as it was said before, I have organizing a network of critical zone observatories, and the French network is called OSCAR, and you can have more information onto the webpage. It's covering the world, the entire world, because of our collaboration with those southern countries. So to conclude, the critical zone is the only interface of the planet that is habitable. This is really what I wanted to, the take-home message of my talk today. It's both an object, poorly known as a system. We have a lot of knowledge, but these knowledges are very dispersed. But as a whole, as a system, it's quite poorly known. It's also a scientific initiative coming from the earth sciences, and that's very important that it's coming from the earth sciences, aiming at reconnecting the disciplines, again, around instrumented places. It goes far more beyond. It's reconnecting natural and social sciences, as critical also mean what we need to take care of, okay? And so we don't have to save the planet, What we have to save is our critical zone, because this is really our habitat. And so the critical zone is a frontier object, it was the title of my talk, that have the capacity to reconnect human actions to the Earth temporalities. And then I'm giving the floor to Frédérique, because I think Frédérique is exactly in that concept of connecting different disciplines. We take questions or after the question? Okay, so thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a great opportunity to be here. I think it's the very first time in my life that I'm entering a business school, so I'm very impressed. I'm also very happy because this is Jérôme's idea that we should talk together, and this is very unusual. I'm a theater maker, I'm a literary scholar. I used to study 17th century literature and science. So what am I doing here? Well, maybe I would like to start where Jérôme ended. I think what we are facing today is really a moment when disciplines, experts, people from very different backgrounds are suddenly gathered in front of the same question. How are we going to survive? And you were talking about sustainability earlier. I think this is absolutely, in terms of philosophical question, how do we sustain, how do we pursue, how do we continue to live on this planet? And I like the way Jérôme presented the critical zone as an objet frontier object, because it's what I will be talking about tonight is really about translation. How would we translate? What kind of frontier do we find? Common frontier, so that we can communicate between very different languages, disciplines, agendas, maybe? Do we have the same agendas? How do we connect those very different things? What kind of common tongue, common language do we find? How do we translate from one discipline to another? And really, the critical zone concept that Jérôme brought to us in France, when I say to us, it's a very broad community, is one of those translating tools, really important. And to tell you the truth, the critical zone for me is very important. It's the name of my theater company. And I chose it as a bit of a provocation because, of course, as you mentioned, in the word critical, there is a scientific idea, but there is also a political idea, but there is also an economic question, and there is also an aesthetic question. And those things together, I don't pretend to address them all together tonight, but I will try to show you how the critical zone really is a frontier notion that can help us navigate between all those different disciplines, because at the end of the day, it's only one common question that we have. The title of my short talk tonight is called Landing on Earth, as an homage to our common friend Bruno Latour, who wrote, as you know, Où atterrir, Where to Land, and who also made in the 2 or 3 final years of his life a beautiful exhibition which was gathering scientists, economists, artists, anthropologists, and this exhibition was called Critical Zone. It was in Germany, and the subtitles could be the subtitles of our talks tonight. It was called The Art and Politics of Landing on Earth. So this is really, again, a footnote, not the bad page, to Bruno Latour's great vision. And my subtitles was Tools for Sketching and Navigating the Critical Zone. So the second thing I would like to do with you tonight is sharing very simply some of my tools, hoping that you might be able to translate them into your own perspective, into your own discipline. Because of course, again, staging theater and studying books might seem very foreign or very remote from what you're doing here in a business school. But I do believe that some of my tools could be used for you as well. As I said, I would like to start where Jérôme ended, in one of our common pictures. And you will see that we have lots of common images despite our very different disciplines. So this is one of the images that has been used, and I'm sure you've seen it, to describe the Anthropocene. And interestingly enough, it's also an image of the critical zone. So I'm also very interested maybe in our discussion later with Jérôme and you to see this coincidence. The question of the Anthropocene and the question of the critical zone happened more or less at the same moment, and let's try to understand maybe why. And next to this image that tries to gather some of the problems that Jérôme has beautifully explained before, next to this image there is the Atlas de l'Anthropocène, and the reason why I've put that is that I think you might be more familiar with the names on this book than with our names. François Gémen, he's always on TV. You know François. He's a friend of us, a colleague of us. He talks to businessmen directly in a very interesting way, provocative way, but he's also the author of this book called The Atlas de l'Anthropocène. And the reason why I'm showing you that is that I really think the question of atlas, the question of mapping, the question of cartography is one of the questions that gather us to tackle the problem of sustainability. This is in the other direction. One of the other ways to represent the Anthropocene, I like this image, is the Anthropocene square meter that tries to tackle the question that Jérôme described when he said that we don't actually know what kind of Earth we are making. We don't really know our own planet. And in my vocabulary of 17th century historian of science, I call that a terra incognita, an unknown Earth. And this is something which is both fascinating and absolutely frightening. The fact that we have modified, transformed the very texture, nature of soil to an extent that really puts the Earth in a state that we can't control anymore. We don't really know how the planet will react to this anthropogenic transformations. And this is only one way to represent, and you will see that I will discuss a lot the question of representation. This is one way to represent this change in the very nature of the Earth. The reason I'm showing you that now is to insist on the fact that the way I have tackled with my own discipline this question is the question of representation. And here you will see how art and science are really gathered in this common interest. The women who have published this book, those two books actually, Art of Living on a Damaged Planet and The Feral Atlas, is called Anna Tsing, and I really engage you to go and see her website and her books, which are online by Princeton University Press. It's all free and online. And it's fascinating because it's a way to create images both with scientists, with anthropologists, with ethnographers, with philosophers, and with artists. And it's a way to expand our understanding of the Earth. There is a lot of economy in her images. There's a lot of business because, of course, the way the Earth is made today is made by trade, by having lots and lots of material going from one place of the world to another. And this is one of the things that Anna Tsing from California is actually trying to represent. Right. Now a little bit about my own project. The starting point, as I told you, was to understand that we don't really know the Earth we are living in. We are in a terra incognita. This is a major challenge of representation. And this is also a bit of a paradox. We don't even know where we are. This image is, you might recognize him, is an image of Bruno Latour showing the soil, so showing the floor. And in a way, he's a bit amused in this moment. It's a play we have made together called Inside. And it's a play in which he says, look, we actually making a play about something not only very difficult to see, but actually not very impressive to look at. It's just the planet. And he's showing with his fingers this thing, which is the soil. The problem, the challenge, but also the tragedy, according to Latour, is that we don't have an image for the critical zone. We have lots of scientific images. We have lots of research made by Jérôme and his colleagues all over the world, but we don't really have a common image. You might tell me, of course we do. We have the blue marble. We have, we know this image. This is not the critical zone. And this is exactly where we met, Jérôme, Bruno Latour, and myself. We met at this cross-section between a scientific challenge, how to describe better this entanglement of short and long cycles that Jérôme told you about, how to describe better that, how to give us a common image which is striking, which is strong, which is faithful to this new terra incognita, and how to share it. That's why I would like to tell you about tools of observation, but also tools of representation. So one of the questions I would like to ask you after my short talk tonight is, what are your tools? Is economic one of the tools? And of course here I'm thinking of the donut, for instance. What are your tools of representation? How can you participate in this common endeavor to represent the Earth in a way that is actually useful for the challenge we are discussing tonight? So just to summarize and to go on, the question is how to move away from this old vision of the Earth as a blue marble, as a planet. And one of the things we've been doing with Latour is to make it explode, simply, to explode completely this vision of the planet as a globe. Why, maybe you will ask? Well, because it doesn't help us to understand really what is the critical zone. So in a series of performances, conferences, you can call them as you want, we try to challenge this representation of the Earth and to invent new kinds of representation. And to do that, we completely, let's say, exploit Jérôme Gaillardet's images, concepts, research, and this is something Bruno did very explicitly. We start with this idea of cycles that Jérôme explained in the new conception of the Earth. And yes, I do a little parenthesis. One of the things I have been doing in my early years, when I was your age and doing my PhD, was to study the change of representation in the 17th century. I'm not going too far, don't worry. I'm not doing a lecture on 17th century astronomy, although I'm sure you would be fascinated. But what happened in the 17th century, as you remember, of course, is that we went from one type of representation of the cosmos with the Earth at the center to a new type where the sun was at the center. And of course, that had tremendous consequences in terms of politics, and in terms of philosophy, in terms of vision of the world. One of the things we really wanted to tackle with Latour and Jérôme is to understand that what's going on today is as important as what was going on at the time of Galileo. It's a change of the vision of the cosmos. It's a change of vision of the Earth. Not only vision and representation, as I told you, it's a change of the Earth itself. And one of the questions was how to go from the blue marble to the cycles. We've been doing that. We went back to the beautiful images of Humboldt that Jérôme also showed. And we continued the theatrical endeavor with a book called Terra Forma. And I will just show you a few tools of that book, because it's a book of cartography. It's a book of maps. And as I told you, I think maps, and you know maps very well as business people and economic people, you know how maps are important to understand trade, to understand anything that deals with movement. But the problem that we had is that we considered that the map that we have as architects, as designers, as citizens, don't really include the questions we have today. So this little book, Terra Forma, that I did with two architects, Alexandra Arène and Axel Grégoire, is a book that tries to reopen the question of tools and representation. I will just go through a few of those maps in a very short way, but just to show you that we haven't solved the problem at all completely, but what we have tried to do is, in a way, to give images to the critical zone. We have tried to change a little bit our vision of the Earth as a globe that you can see from above, from, the God's eye point of view. And we tried to give depth to the surface. As you know, in any kind of typical geographical map, to do trade, to do military, to do any kind of human things, the map is flat. The surface is flat. So what you don't have is the critical zone. You don't have the depth. So what we tried to do is to open up, in a way, the globe and to show it as a globe that you put inside out. You might think that, what's the point of doing that? Well, one aspect of it is, for instance, that the atmosphere is now in the center, in the black circle in the middle. It's quite interesting in terms of imagination, because you realize that whatever you put outside is not outside, it's actually in the atmosphere. And as we know now, it remains in the atmosphere. Not only does it remain in the atmosphere, but it goes very quickly from one place to the other. It goes very quickly from Japan to France, from the US to Australia. So this is one aspect of this map, to change a little bit our vision of the atmosphere. The second aspect is to try to give an image to what Jérôme was saying earlier, the fact that now the biomass and the technosphere are equal, and that our soil, our critical zone, is full of organisms, is full of life, but is also full of infrastructures, pipes, nuclear waste, all the things we are putting underneath. But it's actually our Earth now which is made of that. Not only our Earth, but more specifically our critical zone, which is full of those things. Okay, I pass a few slides just to get to a little thing I want to show you is my tools as a historian. This is a very strange image from the 17th century by a great Jesuit scientist called Athanasius Kircher. The reason why I'm showing you that is that I like the idea that in order to renew our images, it can be interesting to use the very old images. And at the moment, in philosophy, in the anthropology, there is a lot going on with this idea that we should get inspiration from other periods of time, but also from other countries, from other ways of representing. So just wanting to show you a little bit of Kircher, beautiful images, so that you see the link with terra firma, of course. One more maps, and then I will go to my conclusion. One more maps I wanted to share with you is what we called living landscape map. And it's a map in which we try to change our conception of what is space. In a way, as we know now, thanks to biologists, thanks to geochemists, thanks to geologists, the space we live in is made by the living things. It's made a lot by all the movements that Jérôme described, but it's also made by the living things. It seems obvious. We know that we breathe thanks to oxygen, which is produced by plants. We know all that. But in our current maps, we never show the living things. We don't show to what extent all the living things are actually producing our living space. And this is something we just wanted to, again, it's a little bit of a game, of a graphic game. We wanted to show a map in which the space, here, this is Paris, the space is made by the movement of things, humans, but also microorganisms, but also animals, but also, all the living things. And just to show you, sorry, my historian trick and turn of the mind means that I wanted to show you the navigation map of the 12th century and 13th century. I promised that it was a talk about how to navigate in the critical zone. And this is a question that was very important, of course, in the Middle Ages. How do you navigate without all the current tools that we now have? Well, they were using those beautiful maps called portulans, navigation maritime maps. And as you can see, again, this was an inspiration for us to do our own navigation map. So just a little reference to history. I passed that, but those maps try try to include time, they try to include resources, they try to include how you deal with destroyed soil in the future. They try to include things which are normally not included in maps. The book Terraforma was published 5-6 years ago, and since then we've been invited in many architectural school, design school, art school, for the first time again business school, and we have used those maps as a way to reopen the question of representation. What you see here is a series of maps that have been made by students in different art schools. And what I like with those maps is that they just show us one thing, is that our current ways of representing the Earth are actually arbitrary. They are one way of representing the Earth. And I'm sure you know the very well-known maps in which China is at the center of the planisphere. We know that if you change your point of view, if you change perspective, the whole image is renewed. What if you decide to take one of your challenges, one of your questions as the center of the map? Let's take again the question of the soil, the question of the living things, the question of the resources, and let's see how it modifies your vision and your way, your sketch of the world. I wanted to end that talk with a series of little worlds. This image has been sketched by Bruno Latour, and as you can see, there are 7 planets. Each planet has its own specific drawing. I will describe that very quickly as the last slide, and I hope you will give me your own drawing afterwards. The first one, called Vindication, is, let's say, an archaic planet, the planet against which modernity has been, in a way, fought. Vindication is the old way of living, is archaism, is everybody depends on its own little territory. You see what I mean? It's what modernity tried to escape from. Modernity has been drawn as a little Galilean, astronomical, cosmological drawing. It's when we discover that the Earth is moving and is not at the center of the universe. In the same line, you have globalization. This, you know this planet. It's Shanghai, it's Manhattan, it's Tokyo. It's the planet of a small world, completely united by technology and by the unified economic modern world. This was very much our parents or grandparents, 50s, 60s, 70s. But then at that moment, there is this new planet called the Anthropocene, which is actually quite old already. It started in the 70s, you know, the first warnings that were sent by scientists, 70s. And from that planet, and then again, this is Bruno Latour explaining to us what's going on, you have the choice between 2 planets, one which is exit and one which is security. Exit is actually represented by Elon Musk. Elon Musk 2 days ago told us that he will be putting the flag, the US flag on Mars very soon. Exit is a way to promise that we will escape the Earth when the Earth is destroyed. So exit, as we know, is only for a very few billionaires. So what remains for the others is security. And security is, of course, what's happening right now in the last 24 hours in the US. What I find fascinating is that this drawing was made by Bruno Latour 5 years ago. And now what we can see is that the two planets, exit and security, Musk and Trump, are exactly converging. They are one planet, but they used to be two planets. What remains if we don't want exit or security is the seventh planet, which is called, according to Latour again, the terrestrial. And this planet is really the challenge we are discussing tonight. It's the challenge of sustainability. It's the challenge of how to accommodate millions of people, things, living things on the same space. And what is interesting is that in terms of politics, this terrestrial planet, according to Latour again, which I'm quoting, is exactly at the opposite. I like this little drawing because it's a way to show the importance of representation. It's also an invitation that I'm sharing to you now to draw your own planets, to draw your own planetarium, and to situate yourself. If you make the exercise, you will realize that very often we are in between a few planets. Nobody is only on one. We are a little bit on modernity. We are a little bit on globalization. We are still in the Anthropocene. Sometimes we dream of exit. Security, I'm not so sure, but terrestrial for sure. So the question is, how do we navigate between all those planets, and what kind of tools we choose to give ourselves and to share in order to imagine a sustainable planet on which to live together. Thank you very much.
So thank you cordially for your presentations. It was actually refreshing to hear about the core, what lies at the core of climate change and the things that we're going through right now instead of the buzzwords. So I thank you for that. And I'm really excited to dig deeper. And I didn't want to start from the US elections, but we mentioned Musk and Donald Trump, so allow me to ask the question. So with the US withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, well, yet again, how does this reshape the narrative of the Anthropocene in terms of global power dynamics? And from a philosophical perspective, how can we inspire nations to take collective responsibility for climate actions when major players are stepping back? Maybe Madame Frédérique?
Well, it's a difficult question. I think the US. I mean, it's probably more complicated than the way you presented it. I think even if he seems to be a climate denier, I think Musk is surrounded by people that are perfectly aware of the situation, that we are putting CO2 in the atmosphere at a rate which is not compatible with the natural rates of CO2 removal. But I mean, they probably have a plan. So Musk wants to leave the planet. I think it's a dead end, but it's Musk's problem. But you see that the Americans are looking for the Greenland, for example. They are talking about moving to the north, to the Canadian lands. And so they probably understood that parts of the planet are going to be non-habitable, non-livable, and they are just, forecasting the situation and taking measures in order to keep their business as long as possible, to maintain their business as long as possible. This is This is my interpretation.
Just to like maybe dig a bit deeper, but shouldn't it concern us that, well, once again, they're stepping back from this collective trial to make a positive change yet once again, because they maybe value the business more than the actual actionable steps that we could take to prevent that whatever we know is going to happen.
Yeah, but when you go to China, for example, and I'm working quite a lot with Chinese colleagues, this is not the way China is evolving. China has a really, I think, smart program on global sustainability. The new plan, which is it's presented as the planification, is completely in line with removing CO2 from the atmosphere, developing renewable energies, preserving the planet actually. So, and as you know, there is a lot of people in China, much more than in the US, and so maybe we can keep optimistic and stay optimistic because this, the equilibria. The global equilibria between the different continents and countries are going to go into the good direction, because Trump is not the only player. European community should be stronger, but China, India, and Africa, of course, are also there and will play a big role.
Thank you, Madame.
Yes, it's difficult to talk about the present when you are a historian. What I want to say is I think we can't underline enough the historical break of what we are living on those days. And I was showing those two planets of Musk and Trump, and the fact that they are so spectacularly united at the moment is really clearly a historical moment, a historical break. And what I find quite fascinating is that this happens only a few days after the Los Angeles tremendous fires. So we have, again, if we try to take a little bit of a historical distance, we have the coincidence of three major events. The rich people realize that they won't escape the catastrophe, and this is maybe the very first time. This is not Valence. This is not Mayotte. This is Pacific Palisade. This is the the symbolic place of economic success. So you have this coincidence between everybody now on Earth is aware that it's not in the future. It's not only the poor people. It's everybody, and it's now. So we have the coincidence between that realization and the complete denial of it all. But like Jérôme, it's very interesting to see to what extent the cynicism goes, because it's not denial. They know perfectly what's going on. And again, I have to mention Bruno Latour, who said that very clearly. They abandoned the idea that the whole world could be saved. So very, very clearly, there is a choice that is being made at the moment to save only a very short part of humanity, the richest, the Western world, and all the others will be very clearly wiped away in a cynical way. And that's why, again, I think if we take the very news of today, the talk of the woman, comment on dit en anglais, the priest who answered Trump today, it's very significant. The way she reminded him, because she completely pointed the very meaning, the very political meaning of Trump and Musk common election, so to speak. She said, you forget the others. And I think she said it all.
From what you said, you come from very different disciplines. but I think there's one common denominator, which is understanding and representing at least the Earth's critical zone, but I guess more broadly too. And I was wondering, apart from understanding and representing, are there any solutions that emerge from your work? So that's the first question. And the second one is, would it be right to see your work, Miss Touati, as the communication arm of biological sciences, for example, by creating a speech around this issue, so that people can then act based on what you're producing?
You're asking me a difficult question, because I have to admit that to be very sincere, that I hate the word communication in relation to my work. But maybe you're right. Maybe I should, stop having those little, problems of, being called médiation scientifique and all that. To tell you the truth, I've done all my research on my PhD on the idea that art is not an illustration or a communication of science, and that it's actually at the very core, using the 17th century as a proof that art's representation was actually a cognitive tool, an epistemic tool, and not an illustration only. So I like to think that our alliance with Jérôme is not only that Jérôme is the serious guy, and he's a man, by the way, and I'm a woman, and he's older, and I'm younger, and etc., and he's the scientist, and I'm the artist. You see, this kind of old dualism. I like to think that we can do something better than this kind of old couple thing. Yeah.
I can see we have a question in the audience, so maybe let's pass the mic for now, though I have many questions to come.
Dominique Chauvin, prospectiviste. Merci pour ces deux conférences. Thank you. Sorry in English. Thanks for those conferences. But I have just a comment. Something is missing in your atlas of Anthropocene. And in particular, you have, at this moment, 1 million persons living in the sky at 10,000 meters from the Earth, permanently. Obviously, those are not the same at each moment, but because they are in the plane, you have 1 million persons in the sky. And in the space, you have 20 people in the space today. And in 10 years from now, you will have half a dozen of people living on the moon. That is the reality. So the comment I want to make is that the thickness of the skin of the Earth, what you call the critical zone, is bigger and bigger and bigger. And for example, the radius of the Earth is not anymore 4,000 meters as we learned on the school some years ago. And this is the case for 40 years. The radius of the Earth today is 40,000 meters because of the satellite on geostationary orbits. And thanks to them for having a better knowledge of the skin of the Earth, as you call the critical zone. We know this critical zone because of the satellite, which are very high. So my feeling is that this critical zone will become bigger and bigger and bigger, even until the moon soon. And this is what we have to consider in order to evaluate what is the critical zone. And just something amusing, there is a man on the Earth who has a record of amplitude because he used to be an astronaut with very high altitude, but he is also a guy going deep on the sea with a submarine. And he has a record of amplitude between high in the sky and low in the sea. So the critical zone will become also in the future in the sea, because we will have some station on the way. And as a prospectivist, my message is that we have to consider this critical zone as bigger and bigger and bigger.
Can I answer? Yeah, maybe you're right, but the fact is that the people, even if they are in a plane or like turning around the planet on a satellite, they need food. They need to feed themselves, and so this food is not going to grow into the space. You rely on the soil. You rely on cultivating parts of the planet which are providing the food to these people. So. What do you mean? You mean we're going to cultivate on Mars? I don't think so. Yeah, but if you come back to the very, basic functions of ecosystems and life, you need to feed yourself, right? You need energy. You're what we call an autotroph. You're not an autotroph. You're a heterotroph. You rely on other living organisms to get your energy. You're not able to fix the energy from the sun yourself. Okay, so this is also the critical zone is not like a static, object. It's as it was said many times tonight about biogeochemical cycles, and you are what you are. We are what we are because we are, inserted into biogeochemical cycles, and we need to have these cycles to be alive. Otherwise, it's finished.
I just want to draw in the conversation two things. One of them is the film I've seen last week, and I'm sure you've seen it years ago, all of you. It's called Seul sur Mars. It's a fascinating film where you have Matt Damon alone, abandoned unwillingly by his team, and he has to survive waiting for food. He has to survive on his own for I can't remember, hundreds of days. And it's fascinating because for me, it's an absolutely beautiful film about two things. First of all, about our dream of being, as you said, in the sky, on the other planets. And the fact that this dream is ongoing. This is a very strong dream. And in a way, it is possible. But it's also a film about the impossibility to cut the link with the Earth. The moment when he has no links anymore, he's lost. So I want to make a little thought experiment and a little exercise in imagination and drawing for all of us here. How would you represent what you call a deeper critical zone? I don't think we can just expand the critical zone of Jérôme. I think we should put the way I see it, is some lines, some very thin lines that link each person in the plane, each guy in space, and maybe each future person on Mars and the Moon with a line. But it's not a deeper critical zone. It's the critical zone and all the extensions. And if you cut one of those cables, you die.
If I may take a step back, but thank you for this question. That was very interesting. Because I would love to hear more about the reference that you made at the beginning of your presentation, Madame, about the Anthropocene concept of living on a damaged planet. So the original question was, how do cultural narratives like this shape our understanding of human impact, and how can they drive more inclusive solutions? But maybe could we elaborate of what is this living on a damaged planet concept that we mentioned?
Yes, Anthropocene is a very inspiring thinker at the moment, because he tries to address sustainability with a philosophical and anthropological vision and eye. I just want to mention a few titles of her books, because I think the titles say a lot. What you mentioned is Arts of Living on a Damaged Planet. Another one is The Mushroom at the End of the World. Oh, I can't remember the subtitle right now, but it's about, yes, it's about surviving in the ruins of capitalism. And this is also a very important subtitles. So what Anna Tsing tries to make is really to think together, and that's important for us here tonight, economics, politics, history, art, and survival. I really think she's one of the very few thinkers I know who manages to make the link. The Mushroom at the End of the World, which is absolutely a must read for any student in business school, I think, starts from a very, very close study of the trade of a mushroom, of a very luxury mushroom. And by following, because it's really following the trade, where it grows, why it grows there, how it's actually extracted, where it's sold. She makes an image of our present time, which is absolutely striking. And I think it gave me some kind of optimism, because if we follow our line of thought tonight, we really be depressed at the end of the day. But what is interesting is in Anna Tsing is that she shows that it's possible to live in the ruins of capitalism, because this mushroom actually grows only in destroyed forests. I think it's a beautiful image to keep in mind. And it's also important to keep in mind the formula ruins of capitalism, because very often the soil we are studying with Jérôme are actually ruins. So the question is how to live in ruins is very concrete when you live in Mayotte or in Los Angeles right now, but it's very concrete as well if you live in Lyon and you are living in the Chemical Valley, where all the soil around you are actually impossible to use. So the ruins of capitalism now, it's even our air, it's even our water, with the FAS and all the permanent polluters. So we are living in some kind of ruins. The question is how to survive now in those ruins.
And if I may complete, what is also nice with Anna Tsing's way of thinking, that she's not putting nature on one side and humans on the other side. She perfectly shows that we are completely connected. We connected to the mushroom because we are buying it, cultivating it on destroyed lands, as Frédérique said. So it's really interesting, this symbiosis between humans and damage nature.
And machines. She also includes machine, which is quite rare.
Machines. Absolutely.
I don't really have a question. Unfortunately, I have to leave. But after listening to you, I know that I will come back to you, because I'm thinking of building a colloquium on science, science fiction, and utopia. And I already have contacted many people for that. And I think that there is a way of thinking in the literature which also bridge the gap. I think of the book of Damasio, for example, which are very interesting. The last book on Silicium Valley is really putting the finger on what we're living. And I think that what's going on in the States now is a logical phenomenon following up this evolution that has been occurring in the last 10, 15 years, and even more. So I will come back to you. I'm sorry I have to leave, but one issue I think which is extremely important that you raised right at the beginning, and I'm sorry that you did not follow on that, was the issue of translation. Because the issue of translation, the Babel in which we are living, is really one of the key. And there is also another point that you have approach both of you, and mainly in your last slide, which is a good resume, although I don't like Latour very much, I must say. But that's something else. But which is very interesting, is to introduce the time dimension. So there is critical zone in time as well. So critical means rupture. And that's also one of the interesting point that I could, if I can resume from your very last slide, I think. So thank you very much. But I have to leave, unfortunately. But I will come back indeed, because I've got your connection now. Thank you so much.
If I may, what is interesting in your both presentation is the question of representation of the planet, taking into account all the subjects you mentioned. My feeling is that it could be interesting to think through entropy. I don't say energy, I say entropy. And what is really in my mind the real view that we have to project in the future is what is the entropy of the planet today and in the future. Why? Because of the interaction of the man and the planet. And the question is order and misorder. Entropy has to see with organization, with information, and what is the real characteristic of this planet because of the man and woman is how we are able to transform it in a sense that will reduce the entropy of the planet, which means that we will put more order on it, and we have a way in the future, which is on one side more order and sustainability, and on the other more chaos and disorder.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that life, as you may know, life is increasing entropy, decreasing entropy locally, but it's participating to the increase of the entropy of the universe, because if you want to keep alive again, your brain is a really complex system and it needs a lot of energy from the outside to be sustained, maintained. And I think it's the same with, for example, we are entering into a numerical era, right? We have computers everywhere. It's an increase in the order, I think, so to say, in the prolongation of our brain, so to say. And so, I think we are decreasing the entropy locally, but it's also accompanied with a need for increasing the entropy of the outer system. But I don't want to enter into a physical. Yeah, the cosmos, yeah.
At the scale of the Earth, you can reduce entropy locally at the level of the Earth.
I think so, yeah. But it's...
Thanks so much. Also encouraging other questions if there are some. I just wanted to pick up on, Frédérique, what you said at the beginning in terms of providing tools that help us deal with a situation and somehow building a symbiosis in a way with the natural sciences and the arts. And I think it's interesting that you said arts for you was an epistemic tool, not only an illustration. And then at the same time, maybe being a bit provocative on the one hand side, I think those images speak to everyone on an emotional level. I think they also provide a completely new perspective. You were sort of referring to the Copernican turn in a way. So maybe it's that. And at the same time, they also contain a lot of complexity to the point where I have difficulties navigating it. And I think one of the problems that we have with the population in general is, you know, Jérôme, your interpretation was the people in power understand this very well. They're sort of hedging their chances. They don't care about anyone else. If we want to mobilize socially, We need to make a broader part of the population understand so that they act differently. And how far do those representations actually help us do that? And how far do you think we're still away from it? And what else could we do in order to, foreground the critical zone more than it currently is? And what would that change in terms of perceptions of people, actions of people?
It's a great question. Thanks a lot for that. It's a question I'm asking myself every day. In a way, I agree with you. The maps I've shown are not immediate tools. But let's imagine the fact that maybe it's good to have different types of tools. Some of them could be a bit more complex. Some of them maybe need how-to manual. Some of them need to be shared, explained, maybe improved, and some of them might be more immediate. So the question I would like to ask you in return is, what is the aim of the tools? What should be the aim? Is the aim only, so to speak, to make a big impact at one point and to seduce or convince everybody? Or maybe we should also have tools that we can discuss as objets frontières, frontier objects, that allow us to translate, to have precisely the discussion we have tonight between, very, very different background, very, very different people, but I think we share a common discussion, really, although we don't have the same tools in mind. And maybe it's because we needed the time to understand Jérôme's complex science. Maybe you took the time to understand my strange endeavors. And that's the reason why we can talk now. So I'm really asking, and I think this is difficult for me as well, but I have accepted for myself the idea that I will try to produce different types of tools. Some of them are emotional, and that's good, because this is part of rhetoric. This is a very old tool. But some of them are a way to discuss with Jérôme. Terra Forma is very much a tool that allowed philosophy, science, and art to discuss. And some of them, but I'm still inventing them, and maybe I will need you for that, are more impact tool. And again, I'm talking about the donut because, okay, that's the only thing I know about economy. Sorry about that. But it's so huge. It made such an impact. And I would be, I think, I don't know, I'm asking you seriously tonight, is the donut something you take seriously in business schools? Is it something which is, according to you, a useful, efficient tool to make business people understand that you can't go beyond certain limits? Because what I find interesting with the donut model is that it very much merges with scientists' kind of limit models. So I'm really curious. Tools, again, it can be tools of description, it can be tools of rhetoric, but it can be also tools of discovery. And I think it's important to distinguish between those different types of tools. But tell me about the donut.
I don't want to sort of take too much of your time and everyone's time, and Jérôme might be interested in your view as well. But I think the donut, in a way, yes, we take it seriously, but I think we take the scientific part that is behind it or below it or whatever you might call it, like the planetary boundaries, more seriously, because they are also grounded and evidence-based, and the donut is a clever way of making people aware of it. But if I'm relating it back to what you were saying about the globe and sort of the blue pearl or planet or whatever, I think it's much closer to that. I think you are sort of almost arguing for some kind of a revolution in the thinking. I don't think the donut delivers that. It's very much aligned with this idea of the globe, and somehow we're sort of trespassing certain boundaries. It has nothing to do with the critical zone, right? And to be honest, I mean, we're talking about geochemical flows. It's part of the planetary boundaries, but the way that you're describing it, and Jérôme was describing it, I think it really makes this point very pertinently. This is what defines whether we survive or don't survive. And how this has been reshaped So it's a completely different way of thinking about some of those things, which are much more radical to sort of the turn in a sort of sun-centered worldview instead of an earth-centered worldview. So I think there is more potential impact in what you're talking about, but what I'm not seeing yet is sort of, maybe in social science we call it boundary objects, something that also brings us to a common ground in a way, where it's not only about translating and initiating some kind of a conversation, but actually presenting something where many stakeholders in a way can relate and then
So,
actually act on it.
It was my answer. Actually, I have two. I had an experience which was really interesting at the Biennale de l'Architecture in Versailles 2 years ago, where Alexandra Arène, which is one of the carters that Frédérique mentioned, she drew a map, a new representation of Paris area, and around the table we had like typical stakeholders that were politically in conflict, you know. So people exploiting the quarries, the plaster quarries, people preserving the biodiversity, an association on etc., etc. And so these people were political enemies, you know. But based on that map, which was lying in front of them, because it's complicated, it obliged them to, you know, to think a little bit and to talk each other. So it was really interesting to see how, you know, this map had the capacity to make people talking again, which is our problem. You know, we don't talk to each other, and we're staying in our, you know, territories and silos. And the second example I'd like to take is we are part of a project which is called Terraforma, by the way, which is to develop low-cost sensors that we're going to distribute to people, you know, to citizens, to organizations, non-profit organizations, for example. And so the people are going to make their own measurements, okay? And so they accumulate data, like, for example, I don't know, whatever, nitrate content of their water they drink every day. And then very rapidly, they have a lot of data, and the question of how do I represent this huge amount of data that I'm collecting myself is a prominent question, you know. And so again, we need this new representation to assemble, to collect the data that the people are collecting themselves. So I'm really optimistic that this new representation that Frédérique and others are inventing are really a powerful tool. The science society, you know, boundary is terrible, you know, and we really need to work against, you know, this division between I'm a scientist, I'm not taking decision. No, that's a stupid way of thinking.
To come back to Bruno Latour, what is very strong in what he taught is the need to describe. And in order to land on the earth, you need to have the knowledge. And to have the knowledge, the first things to do is to describe. In order to have the knowledge of this room, I need to describe every point on it, which I can keep in my memory, for example. The problem is that very often we are going through things without describing them, without knowing them. And what you mentioned, the need to interact between people and to exchange ideas, the first things to do is to be able together to describe things on the same manner. And this is what I kept in memory from Bruno Latour, and this is very strong in what he said.
I can only say yes, absolutely. You're right. Description as the first thing. I just wanted to add, because I realized that I didn't answer your question about what does that mean in terms of action. And it's great that you mentioned the Terraforma project in which we are together, Jérôme. But I also want to say that we are in another project called Transform, hoping that it won't be completely cut by the recent announcement of the government that decided to put away 550 millions.
0.5 billion. better saying it that way.
Yeah. Anyway, so we are part of one of those big national research projects that gather, as you see, very different kinds of disciplines, and the idea, and that's why it's called Transform, and that's why it answers your question, is not only to discuss representation and how to accumulate more data, and of course it starts from that, it starts from observation, description, but the idea is really to transform the way we are not only doing research, but the way we are cultivating, the way we are building our cities, the way we are dealing with transportation. And that's something that really, I think, makes us optimistic as much as we can be at the moment. The fact that, yes, we have big national research projects going on in which we have millions available to try things for real, to really to collect all the good ideas and to put together ways of doing, stakeholders, political, les élus, but also activists, but also students, but also schools. So yeah, that's also an appel that I wanted to make tonight, to join these kind of things.
Thanks a lot. Maybe that's a good note to end, a positive note, a way of wanting to know more about this project, which is hopefully not going to be cut and is going to create ways of actually going into the next steps in a way, engaging societal stakeholders in these conversations, but obviously we'd also want to see actions and a different kind of behavior and attitudes in relation to those challenges that we have. So I'd just like to thank the audience once again, everyone being with us tonight. Sorry, this is a very noisy chair. And I'm sure you're going to stay around for another few minutes so that if anyone still has questions, I think we can have those in the context of a conversation. Thanks a lot once again to our organizers of the Politics Society and for wonderful insights which are actually trying to really bridge all of the sciences, from the arts to the social sciences to the natural sciences, if there is a division even, and society and economic stakeholders and decision makers of the future. So thanks again.